Hello and welcome to the Ask Weldon Show, episode 265. Today we're going to talk about the best strategies to maximize your brain development. Can visualization improve mechanics? And LS's thoughts about freezing, as well as a couple announcements, as you can see here in the sidebar. So let's jump into the show. All right. First, I wanted to talk about the Mind Games program beta web app. So the Mind Games program is something that started as the Mac program in 2015 that I have been working on for the last 5 years or so. And in 2018, I decided to start streaming full-time and doing YouTube full-time and essentially producing that as an app. Then CLG kind of like recruited me, and I went out and did that project for 2 years. And now I am back at the content creation, maybe streaming and focusing on this web app. So in the last few months, I've been trying to get it up and running, and we are at beta. If you want to check it out, you can go to mindgames.gg. I think that I actually have, so I will try to show you here on the web. Yeah. All right, so it's not full screen. Let me full screen it. There we go. You can go to mindgames.gg. You can see here that essentially there's the old website login, which you can go to if you have the video content course, or you can, and there's a support request, or you can read the story about essentially where we are with the launch, as well as there's a public development board that you can participate in. If you want to do QA work, you can join there and volunteer, but that's QA work like in the staging to try to replicate bugs, not like free account and say what you think kind of deal. And then if you're grandfathered in, there's an email here for you to email me if you already own the Mac program. And then there's 2 coupons at the bottom to participate at whatever price you would like to, essentially, there. And it's a paid beta, and it's an actual beta. So unlike most betas, which technology companies with big teams and big budgets launch, they're actually like fully functional. They just put beta there to make it, I don't know, for PR purposes. This is like a pretty rough and tumble beta, as you can see here. I'll show you the actual app now. Here, I think I'm already going to be logged in. Actually, yeah, so I already have logged in and I have an account. And you can't actually see the menus at the bottom of the screen, unfortunately, that show the navigation. But the entire legacy course is in here. So if you come in here, you can actually go to all of the video course. So if you run into an issue with the app, or you are actually going through the video course, you can just do it through the new app. And essentially every day you have to, I am grateful for the treehouse outside because climbing trees is fun. Matcha powder right here. I don't know if you can see that. It's delicious. And bean tacos, because that's what I'm having for lunch. It's not really the right way to do it. There's more training in the app for how to do your gratefuls. But you can see here we have the 3 loops. This was the criteria for getting this thing up and active, and it was essentially you get a lecture. After the lecture, you get an activity, and then there's a mindfulness training exercise, and all 3 of those things work, and when you do them, it checks the progress and then moves you to the next one in the cycle, and then you can see everything here on your history. So that essentially it functions, more or less, depending on the browser you're using. And also it is on the phone, so you can, where's my title screen here? You're going to have to talk through the logo again, but you can see it on your phone. I don't have my phone with me, actually. But you can actually add it to your home screen. So you go to the web app, and you click Add to Home Screen, and you can add it, and it functions more or less like an app. The browser stuff goes away, and it becomes a more or less functional phone application. It's called a progressive web app, and it is native on Android and Windows, and iOS is kind of coming along with the protocol, but we'll see how they do. So that is the first big announcement, and let me pull up my notes again. The second one is community and content. So essentially that means the Discord is active again. You can find me there, and that the streaming might start again, but mainly you're going to find me on YouTube. And I'm not doing any social media or anything, mostly just YouTube. So that is where to discover me. That is where the community is going to be, is essentially YouTube, Twitch, and Discord for the time being. And the third point is my PhD research focus. So I'm also applying again to my PhD, or not again, but I was working on this in 2018 before CLG came along and recruited me. And so I'm going to go back to this application, which is essentially on teenage social and emotional skills development in an attempt to reduce screen time or quality or increase quality of time spent on social media and video game screen time. And if you're interested at all in the scientific aspect of what is going on in the brain neuroscientifically and screen time and development, so my specific interest and focus for development is the teenage years. That is like essentially 12 up to ostensibly 19, right? But 26 actually, in my opinion, for my focus. And then if you want to participate in that kind of discussion, the Discord is the best place to find that kind of content. It's not really going to be on the YouTube channel all that much. This is mostly focused on the AskWeldon brand or AskWeldon show. And if you want to participate in a more deep way, there is a separate Discord, which you can message me about in my Discord, that includes performance coaches that talk about that kind of stuff. And within that community is where I'm going to be discussing my particular focus of my research, which is not part of the broader performance community umbrella, but more to do with social and emotional skills development through sport. Okay, I think that's it. Let's jump into the show. Question 1 from Bruh Moment Incorporated.
Hi, Weldon. I saw a previous AskWeldon episode in which you talked about the adult brain terminating its development in the mid-20s.
Powering on. Mic on. Charging battery.
I was wondering, what are the...
Sorry about the extra noise.
A young adult, 18 to 22, to get the most out of their last few years of brain development. Once they're out of the nest, they're not with their parents anymore, they're living on their own. What things can they do to make sure that they set themselves up best for life with a developed brain?
All right, so I can't answer this question technically, and I am not in the best position to answer it on the neuroscientific level or even the psychological level. But essentially what I was trying to say when I described that the brain doesn't finish forming until 22 or 26 is not that you can actually do anything about what's going on. I'll give you an example of a piece of research in this field. There was a presentation I saw about an ongoing piece of research where they were looking at executive functioning of teenagers, and they showed images of slices of the brain where it was firing at different times when the teenagers were trying to focus on something. That is, like focusing on doing homework, using executive functioning of their brain. And their brains were firing in all sorts of different places. Like in one teenager, it was firing, like, let's say over here, and over here. And another teenager was firing over here, and over here, and over here. And another teenager was firing. It was just all different areas of the brain were lighting up with activity. And then if you look at everybody who has a mature brain, so everybody 20, depending on your gender and your specific circumstances, mid-20s, early 20s, and later, they were all firing exactly the same spot. It's just like if you took a brain imaging map of somebody who was like focusing, it would look identical. You wouldn't be able to tell the people apart at all, really. I mean, probably you could, right, if you actually did, but just at a glance, you'd see like, oh, it's all the same pattern. So what I mean is that the brain is still figuring itself out how to work, and it's still killing off neurons at a massive rate in order to winnow itself down to the final brain. And probably there is a thought about how to optimize that, but that's not actually what I meant when I was conveying that information, but it was rather that this is happening, and I'm going to lower my desk a little there. And you shouldn't expect things out of your adult self that are still difficult to accomplish out of your teenage self, but it's worthwhile to learn anyway and to practice. Maybe you can accelerate the process. If you're looking at the actual question that you asked, how do I improve my chances or take advantage of this? I would say do the things that are easier to do as a kid and harder to do as an adult. In other words, the things that you're going to lose. So that is like learning, extensive amounts of learning. Just study, memorization, I would bet. Social and emotional skills training, transferable skills specifically is the thing that I would focus on. All right, let's jump into the announcements. So I basically already went over them all at the beginning of the show. So let's jump into question number 2.
I've been playing with friends some more recently, Hey Weldon, I've been playing with friends some more recently, but I noticed that every time I play with them, I get nervous about my performance, even though I know they're just friends, and I end up feeding or doing really badly. So how do I solve this problem of playing under pressure with my friends? Thanks.
All right. So I want you to think about this problem as an adaptation to pressure or anxiety. So if you think about, for example, you're playing a PvE game like Super Mario Brothers in your basement all by yourself with nobody watching, you're going to have a very, very low amount of performance anxiety or stage anxiety or nerves, and you're going to be mostly experiencing the stress of just surpassing a hurdle. And you might get into the zone very easily on that. But then if you add, like, for example, your brother sitting there or your sister sitting there watching you, then all of a sudden you have a little bit of performance anxiety. And then let's say you're playing in a game with 10 people where 4 of them are counting on you. You're playing against other humans instead of the world, instead of the environment, and a bunch of other people are watching you online. Then you hit the maximum level of performance anxiety and stress of performing under judgment. And what's happening is your brain, instead of focusing purely on the present moment, on the task, and non-judgmentally, is starting to focus on the future and the past, the mistakes that you made and the mistakes you might make and what that looks like. You're focusing in a judgmental way. How do I appear? What do people think about me? And also in an outcome-focused way. So will I succeed this or not, rather than a task-focused, task execution-focused brain. And all of this is true, and now you understand it, but it's not going to change. There is no magic key that makes the anxiety or the stress or the pressure of these judgmental situations go away. Rather, and we know this from research, it is your coping mechanisms that you build up that allow you to perform in these more rugged emotional environments than like playing a PvE only game alone in a basement, for example. So to do that, you start to recognize the moments that you experience these things, and you're trying to drag your brain from external focus on outcome into the task. You're trying to drag your brain from cogitating about judgment into non-judgmental, and you're trying to pull your brain from the future and the past and into the present. And you can do this through a variety of different tools. I'm sure you can find some great ones on the internet. Almost all tools fall within the categories of attempting to do this, no matter how they're labeled. But I think one of the best things to do is to start by getting allies on your side. So talk to your teammates about what you're struggling with in terms of, okay, like, it's going to be pretty challenging for me, but I'll do my best. I'm stressed out when I gank, or I'm stressed out when I have this solo lane, and you can do it in a kind of like joking and social way, and they can put you at ease, and you can teach them to praise you when you put your gumption on the line, when you put yourself on the line, in your identity and your ego, and you're out there and you're like leaning into that pressure, and you're going to do the thing even though you think that there's going to be a mistake that's going to cause your team failure. They will start to recognize those moments, and they'll praise you for putting yourself out there in those moments, fail or not. And that kind of social come-togetherness and team bonding, I would say, is one of the main drivers of success at an individual level in these team settings, is how much social support you get from your teammates to actually get out there into these very stressful moments and lean forward, see the pressure as nerves and take them as excitement, because you know that you're going to be either doing something amazing or failing spectacularly, and your team is then going to take the piss out of you in like the most team lovable, wonderful way, instead of just silence or ignoring you, hoping that you feel better, or some other bad social signal coping mechanism that groups might do. So my first recommendation is to kind of start with that avenue. At the individual level, there's a ton of stuff you can do, and that's what this entire channel is about. So flip to any random video, and there will be tools there for you. All right, let's jump into the advertisement for the Mind Games program. I kind of went over this already in my announcements, but basically, if you participate in the beta, you will get a beta tag that in the future we will represent in some visual way throughout the entire lifespan of the application. As a beta user, like I said, it is a paid beta. You can do like a half off discount, or you can do essentially full price, 10% discount, and it will tag your accounts as beta when you come in. We have a number of people in. A lot of the people already in the app right now are people who grandfathered in from purchasing it before this new one launched, and now is your chance to get in again in the beta of this new version of the app and this new epoch in the Mind Games program. So make sure to check that out and at least read about it on mindgames.gg if you haven't made a decision yet. All right, third question. Can visualization improve mechanics from Achilles?
Hey, Weldon. I have a question regarding visualization. The question is basically just, can I, and if yes, how, improve my mechanics through visualization? Thanks.
Okay. So let's put visualization and imagery in the same bucket. And there's essentially two ways to tackle this concept. One is, can I improve my learning with imagery? And the other one is, can I improve my performance with imagery, like in pre-preparation? And the answer is probably a little bit minorly in both, but it's a combination of imagery and readiness and a whole bunch of other factors that are going on. But I would say imagery is a very good tool to use to try to solve the main problem of League of Legends training, or any sort of video game where you have to finish a marathon session within which you make a lot of mistakes, and then at the end of the game, when it's over, you get to go review those mistakes, versus a round-based game like CSGO, or let's say shot put, where you're throwing the shot and then you're done and you can like analyze that. It's different from running a 10K race where you make all these mistakes, then you have to finish the race and then analyze them. These periodic games or sports where you can stop after your action and then you can review and you can immediately learn from that moment. So the closer that you're self-reflective and self-observational, like watching tape or like feeling your body and correcting it, is to that mistake moment, the easier it is for the neuroplasticity of that moment where you made the mistake to trigger growth and to allow you to adapt to that mistake and kind of improve. So you're at an inherent disadvantage in a game like League of Legends, or in a sport like racing, distance racing or distance swimming, where you're making mistakes, but you can't do anything about them until later. You just have to file them away. Although you're not really at a disadvantage because everybody's at the same disadvantage, so it evens out, right? But you can be at an advantage if after the match you go back to that moments that you want to review. They'll say the top 3, and you visualize, you use imagery to get your brain back to that time, get your brain back to that moment, and then correct that moment mentally. So you can, for example, say you just ended a skirmish and you would go back and you would watch it. Then you'd close your eyes and you'd feel it. You'd be like, okay, this is what it felt like to do with your muscles. Okay, so remember, you're retraining your muscles here is what you're actually doing. So I want you to image it, but I want you to image your body and what you're doing as you're watching the screen, and the impulses that are coming in, the visual impulses from the screen that are triggering your various reflexes. And then I want you to fix it. I want you to image like the correct thing. So do a quick run through, and since you're visualizing it, you can actually do it 3, 4, 5 times on fast forward. And then you can do it with your hands and fingers on the keyboard, literally on the keyboard and mouse on your desk. You can actually like move. You don't have to press the keys, but you can actually move them as if you were doing it. So that's one way of bringing the brain back to that learning moment and kind of reinforcing the strength of that moment that you had, that opportunity you had to test your limits in the game. And then the other thing you can do is you can do it in terms of pre-preparation. So when you're about to gank mid lane, or when you're about to engage in a fight with a person in a game, or when you're about to, for example, hit a ball in baseball, you can visualize it multiple times, or you can visualize like a worst case scenario of it or a best case scenario of it, and kind of get ready, that inhale and holding of breath that happens before the storm, kind of where you ready yourself for intense concentration and focus. You can do that in order to make sure that you come in fully keyed, ready to go at that moment. So those are the 2 ways I like to recommend to use visualization. All right, final question from Christian.
Hello, Weldon. This is Christian again. I would like to know your stance or opinion of LS's method of freezing. He recently made a YouTube video explaining the possible application of freezing in mid-game scenarios when the map lacked an objective. In LS's mind, freezing a deep lane can be considered an artificial objective, since it denies gold and experience to an opposing laner, resulting in an obvious gold and level lead. Granted, this way of freezing only has a limited window of opportunity in the games it potentially can be utilized, but do you think this way of freezing is worth utilizing in the current meta? What are some benefits of not freezing and simply pushing when there are no objectives on the map that can properly be pressured?
So I know this has been a controversial concept mainly because of how LS has marketed it, but in the pro community, nobody is... He's mainly doing this for people who watch videos and discuss analytics. The pro players, there is one way to deny minions in League of Legends. In Defense of the Ancients, in Dota, you can actually like steal last hits, right? You can like deny a minion by hitting it at the right time. But in League of Legends, the only way you do that is by stacking up more minions than you got to kill, and then denying the person the experience and the gold by preventing them from being there. That's it. So this is something that pros do and think about and talk about all the time. It's like the premise of how it is that you build advantages in lane. It's every single conversation about jungle pathing and lane matchup and what's happening in the game and whether or not people are being frozen on is very dynamic and active all the time. So the main misconception, I think, between fans of LS and what they're talking about in his videos and what they're discussing is the relevance that this has to pro play, because it is something that is already done by top teams and talked about by top teams constantly. Like, probably there's crappy teams that are not doing it or talking about it, but like you have to realize that that's probably because they can't, not because they wouldn't want to optimize in that way, but because the payout versus pulling it off is so low compared to the things that could go wrong if they try it, that it's just, they're not there. They have to focus on much more simplistic levels of coordination. And then for top teams, it's not really a team play. It's more like a laner recognizes when it is a possibility and when their matchup would make it so that this is like a double win in a way. In other words, their opposing laner is farm dependent. They are going to hit an item breakpoint. So just for an example, if you are at one item and your laning opponent is at one item and you're going to freeze for half an item and you're going to get half an item advantage, and then you're going to go and you're going to like use that somewhere while they're like essentially equalizing out the wave later, then if they teleport to the fight, you don't actually have an advantage. You have a half an item maybe, and you have 1.5 and they have 1, but that's not a big power spike. So it could be very artificial in terms of the advantage you get. Or it could be like you have 1.5 items and they have 1, and you freeze and you get your second item spike, and then you can force in this very aggressive snowball fashion, you can force objectives on the map elsewhere that they can't do anything about because they are farming the last 500 gold or 450 gold for their item, and they literally cannot fight you because you have such a massive stats advantage from your buy that it's game ending if they try to contest you. So these things are all being handled essentially by the laners themselves and then brought up to the team as possible objectives that we could do. Now, the reason that this isn't done automatically by every crappy team is because you're giving the other team a 5 versus 4 elsewhere in the map, and they have the advantage also usually in vision because they have a 5 versus 4. So for example, they could use their top laner to pressure the mid lane while their jungler is helping control bot river. And so they have a 2v1 in mid and they have a 3v2 or a 3v3 in bot. And then they can get priority to allow the mid laners to move and pressure bot waves while you're deep freezing. So there are counterplays to this in the grouped play, and your job as a defender is to be able to pull off that defense. But that is a very difficult thing to do and very difficult to coordinate across the map if the other team is proactive and strong in their decision. It's not like the other guy just sits around and waits for the wave to bounce. You know, they go do a play. And a lot of times it is safer to force the catch on the opposing laner and to go and essentially pressure the other quadrant of the map while they're in vision catching. And you have your tempo and your item advantage if you're already winning the lane, let's say. If you're losing, this is a different situation, but if you're already winning, then you can at least net it neutral. At the very worst, you're like, you have numbers advantage and you don't lose anything because you've already pushed and they're catching. But in the best situation, they expose themselves to a mistake and you pressure the mistake. So this is the quintessential example of a forced error versus an unforced error. You are hoping to force an error. And when you are the freezing team, you are trying not to make an unforced error, and you're also trying not to make a forced error that they are forcing upon you with their pressure. It is very damning to make an error when you are down on tempo. So if you freeze and you give the other team tempo, and then you make a mistake on their offensive play, not only do you lose the tempo related to that play, but you also lose the objective. Whereas if you have tempo, so if you are pushing and they're catching, and you have the move, and you make the play, and you mess up, let's say that you make a mistake on your action, a lot of times you are not going to give up any objective. You might give up a little farm, but you're not going to give up some sort of like tower or something because you're ahead in tempo. The most that you're going to give up usually is tempo. That's all you're going to lose. It's ephemeral, and you can recapture it over the course of a minute or two, depending on your lane matchups. So, or a couple waves, depending on how many waves. This is usually how it's talked about in game. I need X amount of waves to regain tempo. So that is the fundamental reason why this freezing thing does not happen always, because it's a niche play in terms of like in terms of long lanes in the mid game, and it depends on so many different factors that usually it's only apparent in post-game review when a laner says, oh yeah, like I was looking at his item and now I'm looking at my item and this would have been a good opportunity. And they bring that up, and then it happens usually if that exact lane matchup is ever drafted again, and that exact situation happens where they happen to like lose the lane and happen to give their first turret and happen to have like a really great like deep opportunity for freezing and happen to also be winning the rest of the map. It's really like, it's not a losing play. It's not something that you should really do if you're losing the game, if you can help it. Unless the other team is bad, in which case, of course, you can do it if the other team is bad. It should be something that is done all the time if they can't abuse it. But usually, if you do it, the other team is like, okay, they're deep freezing on us. That's easy. We just go break the freeze and we kill them. Or we go and we do something else and we kill them there. Or they lose equal amounts of farm on the other side of the map because of the numbers disadvantage. And if they TP into the play, well, then it's just execution. We just have to out-execute them. So it's best if you're winning, because then you know that they can't dive your bot lane, for example. If you're winning and you deep freeze on them, then it's just like, it's punishing, right? But then there's other ways to win the game that are, generally speaking, like more secure. So these windows that he picks out are fantastic windows, and it's like, oh, for 45 seconds or for a minute and a half here for these 3 waves, this could have been a deep freeze situation because they're winning and they have tempo and they have an undivable bot who's like also oppressive, and they have an independent jungler who can respond to whatever, and their mid laner also brought TP and could join the play even if they're pushed into turret, and they have control of top river, so they would at least see that nobody is there on that quadrant, and then they randomly have a deep blue ward, so like it's really safe to do also. And also the matchup in the top lane that they're freezing on is a farm dependent one, so it's like really punishing. It's like a actually good objective instead of just an irrelevant objective. If it's like they're just going to use their skills in a fight, it doesn't really matter how much farm they have. And if I do this now, I'll get my item breakpoint sooner than them, and then we can force the next objective. And there's nothing coming up to set for on the bottom of the map, like there's no dragon in like 4 waves. So check mark every single one of those boxes and you're like, okay, we found it. But teams are not planning around all of that randomness like occurring every single game. This is up, I think, mostly to individual players to teach their team when these scenarios come up. And to be honest, top laners have messed this up so much, and their teams are like, this is crap time, this is a crap time, this is a crap time, that they have literally given up asking, because their teams often don't trust them anymore, because they have messed up so many different times when they should have done it or shouldn't have done it. And then the other thing is like, they just don't bother because the other one is just easier to coordinate as a team and everybody's involved. So it kind of makes sense in an offensive sense, as opposed to your job is to soak all of this pressure and to understand exactly how much this is gaining us in in 2 minutes when I break the freeze, and we have this differential in my champion that we're then going to use for pressure. So that is something that is on the back of the people who are playing the meta champions that could abuse this scenario to recognize these moments and be able to call them in the game in a nuanced way and recognize when it's possible for the team to pull this off and not through discussion with the other lane about their lane status. And that's a pretty complex thing to negotiate on the fly in the moment. It just doesn't happen often enough to replicate over and over and over again like a drill. Which then gets to the training of the game in general. Like, is it possible to train the game differently? And the resounding answer to that has essentially been no, because we don't really have good training modes or good training cultures in a lot of places. So that is the long-winded answer to that topic, which I have never had an opportunity to discuss with Nick, but I'm sure that he's been in teams and realized that this is the case. And if he hasn't, then now he knows.